Go ahead, Avni.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to KRVIA Encounters. Art and architecture are entities that exist in the context of time and space. The setting where they come into existence and the time frame in which they are born are inseparable from the structure itself. They are a reflection of thought and creativity of the individual and an era trying to communicate certain philosophy or principles. India, almost capable of being called a continent, capitalizes on its cultural diversity and the varying amalgamation of customs, rituals, and traditional practices. A traveling distance of every 10 miles in India showcases a diverse palette of culture, language, food, clothing, and invariably the architectural styles that have evolved over the region. The Heritage Photography series attempts to encapsulate and highlight the vintage and antique character of attributes of architecture, spaces, traditional construction techniques, historic connections, ancient practices, etc. These are tangible as well as intangible valuable assets from the past, and photography helps them to bring them back to life through the medium of lenses as captured frames that stay for posterity. Welcome, Alisha, to the talk. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll just start sharing the presentation. It's visible, right?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. Is it okay if I put my camera off only for the purpose of saving bandwidth? I'll put it on again towards the end.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, Alisha. You're
Okay.
audible.
Okay. So a very good afternoon to everybody present here in the forum. And it's very special to present at the college from where you have passed out. So it's a great privilege to be here and be able to present your work with all of you all. So as the title screen, it suggests that the project is about heritage photography. So I will just begin by saying that this is actually not a showcase of or an exhibition of the photographs that I have clicked in the entire 12, 13 years of journey. But there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions which were there all throughout the journey of walking in architecture, where you actually tend to question what exactly is heritage conservation? What are these monuments that you see around you? And what is heritage photography? Why does India need it? Or for that country, for that matter, why does any country need to have the why do they need to protect the monuments they kind of have? What does it do to us? So essentially, because it is heritage photography, it is going to deal in two dimensions. In space, where we actually take a journey of the entire India and we try to understand the cross section of what is a generic culture, architecture, and the diverse communities who live here. What are they trying to say? And the second part, where we will be dealing in time. So we take up any history that has happened. It is incomplete without the time period it has happened in and the geography. Hence, the heritage photography project tries to culminate all of the monumentality history, the cultural diversity that we have in our country, and then tries to speak the story of all of this through the medium of camera. But before beginning the presentation, I would just like to begin with a story which is almost 2000 years old. Today, we have a lot of institutions, universities around us, the D.Y. Patil University, KRVIA we have, Bharati Vidyapeeth, lot of different kinds of universities that we see around us today, which are spread over acres. But if we actually try to delve and try to see what was the India 2000 years ago, we try to understand there were almost 40 universities which are such huge in terms of the scale that they They almost covered the entire country of India, and they were present in every corner where students from all over the country came to learn different parts. So some were very specialized in mathematics, some taught martial art, some taught different kinds of art forms. So students who came to learn here in four walls within the universities, we can see the scale of them in every picture present here. The photographs are not clicked by me, but all of them are showing that the universities were very huge and the kind of diversity that is present here. Students who came in to learn here, and after they finished their so-called, for the lack of any other word, once they finished their kind of degree education, they were supposed to travel the entire India, or Brahman, where after finishing their education of whatever they have learnt in the four walls, they go out and try to experience the India. Whatever they have learned, they try to experience that. Now, the reason for putting this slide up here is because during my architecture, after my architecture, when I traveled a lot, I also got to experience lot of different kinds of not just architecture but also different kinds of people with their different stories, the way in which they feel about the country, the way these monuments were built, why they were built. I'm sure all of us in our minds have a certain stories of why every monument was there present in India, and we have witnessed that when we travel. Now, as mentioned even in the introduction, I constantly feel that India, in fact, is capable of being called a continent. There is no country so huge. And we travel every 5-10 miles, and immediately we see the shift in clothing. People start looking different. People start speaking different language. If we take the state we are talking from, Maharashtra, we have different kind of Marathi that is spoken all across the entire section of Maharashtra. Similarly, you also see a change in the food habits, the way food is received by all of the people here, and also the way of preparation matters. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but could you please minimize the Teams window? It's being shown in the recording.
Is it? Okay, I'll just one second.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
So coming back to where we were, one major thing what came to my mind when I was traveling was that you see Europe, it capitalizes on tourism. Take Japan, it will capitalize on creation. It will constantly create something new. You give anything to the Chinese people and they will make it in the cheapest of cost possible. Now, what does India capitalize on? The answer almost lies in the prelude that I gave to this question. Is we have so much of diversity in our country that if we actually think to acknowledge all of that, we are a huge country which has huge assets, not just in terms of history, but also in the different kinds of ancient practices that we had. So all of us belong to different state, city, country, nation, continent, etc. Wherever we belong to, we certainly walk past by certain monuments. It may be some British hospital where your parents are born. It may be some British school. Somebody must have studied in the Wilson College here in Pune. Somebody must have seen the fort architecture. But there is some or the other historic monument which is present in your state, city, country. Now we just walk past by them as if they are just bound to be here since ages. Do we ever stand in front of these monuments and question why are they here? To then understand that today they may be dysfunctional, today they may be redundant, but at one point of time they were built by somebody. They were built by people who were flesh and blood. They were built for some reason. And if we try to understand, all of them have a certain kind of story, and very interesting story of battles, story of winning certain territories, story of arts and craftsmanship, story to display what the kind of technical abilities that our masons, our sthapatis had. But we have this kind of diversity in every part of the country, and hence the project culminated as an idea. To begin with, it started with the idea that every city has a story of becoming. You take any city, any state, Goa, Karnataka, northern somewhere, somewhere in Kerala, Maharashtra, Gujarat, every city, every state, it has a story of becoming. And I chose to tell the story with the medium of my camera, with the confluence of heritage and photography. Now, if we keenly look at the last sentence that has come up, a confluence of heritage and photography. Now, if we talk about these two words, what exactly is heritage? All of us possess that. Most of the times we say tangible heritage, intangible heritage. But a lot of people present here also, we probably have inherited something from our ancestors, something that we have today. which may be 400 years old, 300 years old. We have some part of heritage within us today. It may be some antiquity, some object, some old house, maybe a 200-year-old house that we have, but everybody is associated to heritage in some or the other capacity. The photograph that you see in front of you all is the Prince of Wales Museum, constructed in the colonial times. When it was constructed, it was a mere piece of architecture. But it is with time that it has acquired some value, some cultural value, social value. Some monuments acquire some politically significant value. So it is time that makes the architecture heritage, that makes it so vintage. Now, why record this heritage through the medium of photography? Now, whenever I used to, most of the times I travel alone. So it is just, I travel with the camera. And what happens when you travel with tours and companies and chaotic locations, what happens most of the times is you digress, you divert. You keep talking, you don't see the monuments. And most of the times, if not always, these monuments are talking. If we give our ear to them, they are constantly talking to us. And they compel us to ask questions like, why were pyramids built, for instance? How were they built? How were the stones cut? How were they lifted? Who constructed Taj Mahal? Everybody knows. But if people ask somebody who's the architect of Taj Mahal, it's not a Shah Jahan. So are we aware of the kind of history that all of these monuments have? How is the double dome technology of Taj Mahal constructed? So once we try to go inside all of these monuments and try to look at what they have to say, they have much more than what meets the eye. So it may be any kind of heritage. In fact, all throughout the presentation, it is structured in a way where we take a virtual tour of India from south to north, and we try to look at all of these possible aspects. We try to look at the archaeological heritage, what is the trade heritage. In terms of water management system, take any civilization in the country, in the world, in fact, anywhere. No civilization has flourished without water. What were our ancient water management techniques? What is the advent of science that we are talking of? Culinary heritage, in fact, it constitutes a huge part of Indian culture, which we'll also come at towards the end of the presentation. But without further ado, if we have to begin, and in fact, we will come to this question again later towards the end of the presentation of why record heritage through photography, and we try to see if we received an answer for that. But to begin with, we try to start with the story of Hampi, which is in the southern part of India. If we are aware of our mythology well and read it, we know that the trade routes or the ancient routes that maybe Sri Ram has gone from an Ayodhya to a Sri Lanka. There is mentioned that that was in Kishkinda Kand. He traveled from Ayodhya to Goapuri. He crossed the entire, the Karnataka, Goa, and then he kind of reached Sri Lanka. Now, the city that you see in front of you is not belonging to the time of Sri Ram, but it has a history which is dated to almost 700 years ago. So Vijay Devraya, King Krishna Devraya, was associated with the Vijayanagar, and you had Harihara and Bukkaraya who kind of were responsible largely for making the city what it is in terms of the infrastructure that it has. The city is very huge in terms of not just the scale, but also the kind of display of architecture, grandeur that one has, and also how money is channelized into making architecture what it is. So just to orient ourselves in terms of space and time, we have a map in front of us where, in fact, I always say that if you have to see Hampi, no bike, no scooter, nothing goes there. You just have two tools to see the city. So one is your legs and other thing is your eyes. So it's a city which is completely full of hills and hillocks. You have to walk down all of the hills. So it's almost a 35 kilometer walk which you have to take, and you have to travel the entire hillocks to see all of these monuments. To orient ourselves, we have the first complex here, the first zone where you have the temples and the bazaar complex on the bank of river Tungabhadra, where the city is. So as it is known as the cradle of Indian civilization, Aihole, which is also present here, you have a lot of, so if this is considered as a lab, the architects, for the lack of any better word, of that time were considered as scientists who experimented in this lab of the city called Hampi to construct a lot of temple architecture. So the first zone comprises of huge bazaars, bazaar complexes and temples of early phase and also late phase, we see that. The second center or the second zone comprises of the sacred center where you will have the queen's closure, you will have a place where the elephants, horses, they have their stables over there. So if you see the monument over here, it's almost a mix of the Deccan Sultanate architecture with the Vijayanagar architecture over here. And the last segment where you have the royal enclosure, where you have the king who stayed here, the queens, the native, the local population who stayed in. So that was a general kind of understanding to know what the city is and how it is placed in zones. So if you see, there were kilometer long markets. Even today, we do not have such wide streets. Now, most of the time, people say that Jaipur is the first planned city of India. But in fact, if we go down the lane of history, we understand. Take example of Fatehpur Sikri, or in fact, even take the photograph that you see in the center today. You have a certain sense of axial planning over here. You have a certain axis in which the temple, the kind of journey to the temple is defined. We always had that. They had kilometers of long markets like this, temples which had engraved, they had carvings, their idea, their language, their grammar of architecture was very well defined. If you see here, we do not have streets which are wide, this much wide, even today. So if you try to look at the architecture over here, at one point of time, today they are redundant, but at one point of time there would have been some people. Today also outside the temples we see people who are selling some kind of stuff, some ritual, some for ritualistics. We have agarbatti, we have flowers, we have garlands. People are constantly selling something. Now why were these markets used? We saw Tungabhadra river from where all of these traders kind of used to come, and that was their access point to the city. And the trade that happened all over these marketplaces. If we try to look at the city, it is completely full of temples and gateways that one sees. Also, it is very significant to notice that when we take a cross section of India, we talk about green architecture and sustainable architecture today, but they were way more green. Try to look at the materials that they were using, it is granite. And if you try to just look beyond the compound wall, you see this is granite. So whatever is the material that is present in the vicinity, so the 1 mile radius concept we speak today, they applied that time. So it is so kind of rooted in the land. So there was zero cost for traveling to get the material on site because everything that they wanted was very much here in the city around them. Again, I talked about the water management system. Tungabhadra river is right across the city of Hampi. But how does one get the water from the river to the kund here? And hence comes the concept of Pushkarni or the step wells. There's a certain channel from where the water is brought inside and it is made feasible for drinking. Now, if you try to look, this is the kind of rugged landscape that one observes in the city of Hampi, all full of granite, and hence it does not look like today's structure where you have a glass skyscraper which is standing, which does not have any relation with the site context. But if you try to look at these monuments, they merge with the surroundings. So we always say that the house has to be off the hill and not on the hill. And this is an exemplary example of how our ancestors made that possible. Again, if we try to look at this, and all of this happens if we only keenly and very closely look at the monuments that are there present when we are traveling in that particular part of the state. I happened to notice this particular rock. Wondering, there were no electrical points that time, there was no plug, nothing. What exactly are these marks all about? So if you try to think, it is just using two things or two tools, which is hammer and chisel, a chini and a hatoda. So just using that, they used to make marks like this, and then just one hammer on this, and it would be enough to break the rocks into different pieces. So once we have this, they use these stones to construct walls like this. Now, mind you, there is no lime mortar. Cement was, of course, not there, but there's not even lime mortar which is present in between these stones. They are merely joined by using the interlocking joinery techniques and the dowel construction. Again, if you try to look at the image here, the second on the top, they are learning how to make slab, and that is what I said when I meant when I said that they are trying to learn how to use the technology. How do you make a slab? You have something, you have two walls, four walls. How do you construct a slab on that? So if you see, they've cut in triangular pieces here, surmounted by some more triangular pieces here, then two more pieces of slabs, stone cut slabs come on the top, so that they're able to protect the temple from the weathering conditions, harsh sunlight. They're trying all that here. And the culmination of practice of all of these years is visible when you see temples in Halebid. Their or their kind of carving is exemplary. In fact, this is soapstone, which is found there, which is a metamorphic rock, which is very easy to carve. And the last image over here, which you see, I happened to stand under the pillar, and I was just observing, wondering what it could have been. To then count these circles that are there, to realize that they are the Dashavatars of Vishnu that these people had carved. The Matsya, Varaha, Kurma, Parshuram, all of these avatars are carved on this monolithic kind of rock. Now, again, when I say that they are masters of technology, they had the flat bricks. So, on the base, they laid stone, and for the shikhara, it has to always be of such a weight that is very less in terms of it should not transfer more load to the substructure. And again, if you try to see this, similar kind of bricks were also used in the construction of the Nalanda University. But if we try to see this and try to wonder what was the mentality, what was the temperament of people of that time, they had lot of time, they had lot of patience, and hence their architecture does not look robotic. It has something to say. It has something to say beyond what machinery does. Some hands have done it. People have spent time doing it, and hence it is a very craft based kind of architecture. Again, while looking at the city, we try to see this, and we today we say single leaf, double leaf, triple leaf masonry, but they are constructing sacco walls at the time where you have two layers of granite and then you have bricks, brickbat koba, which is there in the middle, which helps you ensure thermal insulation. So if you compare an outside to an inside temperature, it's almost a difference of 4 to 5 degrees. Now, ideally, this should have been a wall which would have gone up and it was a temple, and considering this is the external face of the temple and this is the internal face, you almost have a difference of 4 to 5 degrees. Now they very well understood how to treat granite. If you treat granite, what happens? So hence, shaping it in a certain way makes granite create a certain kind of sound. So all of these pillars are called musical pillars, because at that time when you had performances, artists, see, art was given the highest of value in the Indian culture. In Mughal times, in Indian, you see different kinds of kingdoms, it had high value. Writers, poem writers, then you had all of these art forms like dance. So you have all of these pillars which are there around the temple. Even today you find it, but by touching them a lot, and then people have just ruined this. But ideally they were not like this when they were constructed. You see this. Today we use a 6-inch hinge to rotate the door. Just try to look at the kind of spherical thing that is protruding outside. At one point of time, this door would have guarded some king. It would have been a good example of what does grandeur look like. So it would have been probably a huge gateway to some temple. Today, because it is dysfunctional, it is just kind of taken down and put there only for display for us to see how it was at one point of time. But again, try to see the technique that these people are doing. They have this hinge, just one pivot around which the door revolves. Again, I just happened to see up and then realize that on one of the ceilings, lotus is the symbol of life and has huge significance in the Indian history. So they have lot of carvings of all of these flowers, animals on their temple facades. Now, history on a plate. The next image that you see, I happened to go to one of the king's palace there in Hampi to then ask somebody what exactly is this. Now today we have plates with lot of depression. So for instance, people who eat pav bhaji or an idli sambar, we know that plates have certain kind of depressions and different compartments for different kind of things. So a roti will have something else, a sabzi will be placed somewhere else. So if you try to look at this, this is a 1-inch plate which is carved in stone. So ideally you have different segregations for food to be kept, and this was used by the soldiers, by the army people, and they ate food in this. Now, this is so sustainable because all of these plates were kept in a line. There was water which was just poured from one end, and the plates till the end, they were just washed away with that one blow. Coming up north, we go to the city of the state, in fact, of Goa, which has huge history and large amount of stories. Lot of people do not know Goa beyond beaches and the kind of pub life that it has. But if we try to delve more keenly into the Goan architecture, it has a huge story. In fact, Goa was under Portuguese till 1961, even after India became independent in 47. So the one that you see in front of you is a huge fort called the St. Stephen's Fort, which is there in North Goa. Now, what happened? See, we also saw the space time context of Hampi. Now, if we try to talk about the Goan architecture, we see this is Africa, this is Arabia, and this happens to be the Indian coastline. So, when because of the presence of Ottoman Turks in this area, when the movement of all the Portuguese and the Roman people or the Mediterranean Sea people who lived around, it was stopped in the Indian subcontinent because of the presence of Ottoman Turks over here. They had to take something which is known as a sea route, which we fondly also call the age of discovery. So, because of the unavailability of land, they had to, by unavailability, I mean they were not allowed to. So, there were ships which came to India only twice a year, but they did not want that. Vasco da Gama came to India in 1498. Once he went back to Portugal, people there understood that by trading Indian goods, there is a huge profit. There is a large market that is open. So one can be exposed to a lot of money if one comes to trade in India. Hence, they took this entire round of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, came in here, landed to Kochi. Once they landed to Kochi, it was not very difficult for them to spread their arms into Goa and the city that we are speaking from today. Bombay was under Portuguese for a large period of time. Now, if we try to look at Goa, once they come here, they understand that there are a lot of spices, there's abundance of cotton that is present here. There is large trade that can happen. So once they know that they can establish themselves here, the first thing that they do is secure their boundaries. So one very unique feature about the Goan architecture is it has nexus of forts as opposed to any other city or state that we see. Every possible boundary where the sea meets the land or the land meets the river, every possible location, they've gone ahead and constructed a fort there. Now, why a fort? So that tomorrow, if any Dutch, a Maratha, a French, anybody who has to come and attack, they will be monitored from the fortification which is present here. Hence, a huge nexus of fort architecture is present in Goa. But is it only fort architecture that we see? It is largely divided into three headers. So you see forts for the reason that I mentioned. Portuguese came much before the Britishers, so their aim was to first to trade, second was to evangelize. When I say evangelize, they also wanted to convert the people of India into Christians. So once they wanted to convert the people of India into the Christians, what they had to also do is they wanted some physical place for the manifestation of their worship. Hence came the church. Hence also came the chapels and the grottos. Now, once the Portuguese people are staying here in the Goan subcontinent, they will also require houses for their viceroy, aristocrats. Hence comes in the third layer of the mercantile housing, also known as the Fidalgo housing. So you have large scale houses. Now, most of the time we see all of these layers of architecture in Goa, but it doesn't register. And that's what I was also telling in the first slide, that we see these monuments, but we don't question why they are there. And it's only when we try to delve into the history of the city we understand what are they doing here today, and that of course forms a base for why should they be conserved or preserved tomorrow. So as I said, this is the defense architecture of Goa, the first layer. The second, in fact, if you see the fort architecture, it is very unique because it is the European way of design, but the Indian way of construction. So you take any fort in Portugal, in Europe, fort constructed. So if you know the concept of Tras Italian, the star forts which were constructed, you see the European geography, the European terrain was flat. So it was easy for them to construct layered forts over there. But the moment they came to Sahyadris, which start from Karnataka and go right up to Maharashtra and top, the geography over here, they have to deal with terrains, they have to deal with mountains. So they adapted their Portuguese style of design with the Indian way of construction by using the local materials. And how do we see that? With the use of laterite, with the use of country tiles, with the use of architecture that looks very much Indian also in nature. And hence, we cannot segregate a Portuguese and an Indian because it is a culmination of both the styles of architecture together. The second layer, as I mentioned, see, colonial architecture is very grand, very ornamental in terms of the look that it has. The Renaissance architecture, the Baroque architecture. But if you see the Portuguese architecture, the beauty lies in the simplicity. They will not do much ornamentation. It is very simple but very high on proportions and the scale that people were aware of. Again, one of the examples where people are using the classical architecture, the classical revival of the Greek orders, the Roman orders, and constructing all of these churches with the help of pediments, columns, and different kinds of capitals. Again, one of the examples of, in fact, I have a huge collection of Goan houses and the kind of different villages, the Portugal villages which are present in Goa. Just a glimpse of what these villages should have been and the houses should have been, and a very sad glimpse of what they are today. And this is not just the case of Goa. But if we try to take a cross section of India, this is almost the case of most of the heritage that is present in the country, because we do not pay heed to it. We do not understand the significance of why should it be there. And that significance of why should it be preserved comes from the fact that we as a country should understand why are they constructed, by whom are they passed on, why are they standing here, do they deserve to be here, or is everything to be replaced and everything has to be constructed in glass, cement, concrete today. So, being an architect, I have to sadly say that today we construct structures of concrete, aluminium, which have a shelf life of 100 years, 150 years. But try to look at their structures, 400 years, and they are still standing strong. Coming to the state where we are speaking from, Maharashtra, now it is most popularly known for the kind of temple architecture, the varis, the kind of forts that we have. But the reason I chose to show this slide is I hope all of you all can see a Buddha there. On one of my visits to Karla Caves, which is present near Lonavala, I happened to climb up the steel staircase on the top to see this Buddha, which was carved in rock by the monks, the Buddhist monks at that point of time. And if you try to see their architecture, the rock cut architecture, it is very unique. And we have that in abundance. So, like we have a lot of forts in Maharashtra, we also have a lot of rock cut architecture that is present. Huge chaitya halls where people worshipped, huge viharas where people resided. So, if you try to see this, today we talk of ikigai, minimal living, sustainable lifestyle, but these people were following it at that point of time. Now, why are these caves here? When we try to see monuments, we always see them in a perspective that they just exist, you know. In fact, if you see one of these caves over here, this depicts the crown of Buddha, the head of Buddha. And many, in fact, this happens to be from Bhaja caves. This happens to be from one of the caves in Kanheri. Kanheri, in fact, later became a pilgrimage center for the Buddhist propagation, the religion propagation. Now, if we try to see why are these caves here, we know that we see an Ajanta, we know that we see a Kanheri cave, the complex of caves. We see Karla, we see Bhaja, but why are they there? If we try to connect all of these dots together, they have a story to tell. So, as I said, in fact, today we talk about intolerance and all of these things, but if we try to look at India at that point of time, almost 2300 years ago, Buddhism was introduced in the country that time, 2500 years ago. So, Gautam Buddha was here at this time. So, monks, we said that monks carved all of these rock cut architecture that we just saw, but this also coincides 2500 years ago when Buddhism was introduced in India. This clashes with the time when Indo Roman trade also started in India, surprisingly. Now, if we know the Periplus of Erythraean Sea, it is a literature, it is a document which mentions all the trade that happened all over the coastline of India. So, where all did it happen? It happened in Kerala, Muziris, it happened in Gujarat, Bhuj or Bhadukach, and in Maharashtra, it happened in Chaul in Alibag, in Sopara. Yes, so all of these port towns or ports which were present in the coastline of Maharashtra did the job of transporting the import export outside. But what is the material that was traded? As I mentioned earlier, Maharashtra is very rich in the black soil. The Deccan Plateau is very fertile, hence very significant for growing cotton in the country. So if you see, this Python was a very famous center for the manufacture of cotton over here. So whatever was manufactured here in Ter, Tagar, through these routes. Now, at that time, mind you, there were no highways, there were no national highways. People had to walk down through the forest and create routes. So, whatever are the routes that were followed by the traders, the Indo Roman traders, apparently were the same routes that were taken up by the Buddhist monks. And hence, wherever the kind of site was having abundance of water, the rock was strong enough to carve. There they have the rock cut architecture established on the trade routes. So Shri Sthanak, which is Thane, you have caves. Kalyan, you have caves. Kanher, you have caves. Chaul, you will have architecture. So if you try to see this road that goes to Chaul over here, 678, which is Karla Bhaja Bed Setrio, which is present here. In Bhima Shankar, you have lot of caves. In Nane Ghat near Zunnar, you will have lot of cave architecture. So all the material which was manufactured inside was bought here to the coast through the trade route and then was taken out from here. So again, a few more examples of the kind of vantage that the architecture had at that point of time. If you see this, they were very wise in choosing spots. For why should you construct a cave at only this point and not something else? They had their reasons for that. If you see the stupa architecture that has evolved from this to something intricate, which is this. And it has a very strong process of evolution. So this happens to be from the Bedse caves, and this is from the Karla caves. But when we say culmination of architecture, what is it? If all of us have a 1 rupee coin in front of us, we see and we flip that, we see an Ashokan pillar which is present. Where does the concept of having an animal on top of the column come from? It comes from the Greeks, the Corinthian order. So we say that Alexander wanted to invade India. And when he came here and went back, he left a lot of Greek influence on India. And hence, that was the time, in fact, when Karla caves were constructed. Alexander was there around 300 BC. If you see, Karla construction also started after 100 BC. So you see a lot of influence here. The presence of wood, which is very much there even today. This happens to be one of the details of columns, which tries to illustrate how the capital looked like. Again, one of the interesting photographs on the fort of Simagad, but it is not famous for the fort. If you try to look at this process is exactly opposite of architecture. In architecture, we build one on top of each other, we assemble. But in the rock cut or the cave architecture, you remove the unwanted. What is left is what is wanted. So if you try to think very carefully, they're removing the negative space. And it requires way more wisdom than what we are doing today to carefully remove what you don't want so that whatever is remaining is the kind of outcome that you want. And hence they carved the hill like this. At one point of time, this would have been plain, full of grass, full of hay. But they're exactly going down. They followed a process to come down, then go inside, and then carve all of the unwanted parts. And as I again mentioned, the fort architecture of Maharashtra happens to be really famous. The kind of flat bricks that we see, the flat bricks that we see in front of us are not of the proportion of the bricks that we use today. It's not a 230 by 115. It's more flat. In fact, very sadly, I have to say that this is all replaced by cement today. At one point of time, there would have been lime. This happens to be from one of the forts in Alibag. And as I said, the presentation has a lot of questions. So one question that always kept coming to my mind was, we know the 7 forms of architecture, of 7 art forms. So cinema, literature, painting, sculpture, wherever you create something, it is called the art form. Now, most of the people used to say, what is art in photography? What is art? You just go and click what is there. So what is art in that? And for most amount of time, I kind of struggled with the answer of, yes, everything exists out there. True. But so is the case with architecture. Stone also exists, brick exists, mortar exists. But what you make out of it? You imagine a certain thing, and to meet your imagination, you create something. And the purpose of art, what is the purpose of art? You have to express and communicate through your creation. And hence, in photography also, your friend may not notice something which is very interesting visual somewhere on the road, but maybe you have an eye and you immediately go and capture that, and that makes one. Now, and that is in fact what gave rise to this quote saying everything exists out there. What you make out of it gives birth to your photograph, else it would not have existed. It would never exist. Just imagine, I always say this, that what is the importance or what is the significance of photography in the realm of heritage conservation? Imagine you click a Humpy today, the entire city collapses tomorrow. You have some record, you have some document with you. You have some very old post office which is there in your city. Today it is there, tomorrow it might not be. And what an important tool does photography become? And it has to be thought in that context, and that makes photography an art form, and hence a photographer an artist. Now, I always give this as a quiz for people to identify when it is conducted offline. Most of the people say this belongs to Britain, some say it belongs to Florence, anywhere but not Mumbai. Now, this very monument, because of the colonial influence, this monument is very much in the state that we are speaking of, Maharashtra. If you stand in front of the Flora fountain with your back towards the fountain and look right in front, you have the Central Bank of India. If you take your eyes a little up, this dome sits on that building. Very much Baroque, Renaissance kind of influence that the people over there, people in Europe had. Now, when Britishers came to colonize India, of course, they wanted to rule Indians, and they wanted to show people over here that this is the style back home. And hence, they wanted to feel at home. And the kind of architecture also, hence, you see in Fort Precinct is like this, very much colonial, very much European. Again, everybody sees this monument right in front of the Horniman Circle. The in fact, it is Asiatic Society just happens to be one of the tenants. But if you try to look at this monument, Lot of people from Muhammad Ali Jinnah to Mahatma Gandhi must have walked past by these steps. People today go here for marriage photo shoots. Do we know the importance? The columns that are present here, 12 columns were bought from England from the ship. 8 of them were placed here. 4 of them were taken to one of the churches in Baikala. What a huge piece of history is this! It is saying something which is way beyond our understanding of where does this pediment come from, what is this neoclassical architecture, and why is it there in the city. So it is high time that we actually pay heed to the kind of monuments which are there, and I'm not talking only about Mumbai. It is about any city that you must be staying in. Now, from KRVIA, my master's thesis happened to be on the on the conservation of the industrial heritage of the city. And on one of the site visits, I happened to go to the mills. And very popularly, we know the story of mills, and they went down the lane of. Uh, it is a very sad story. What happened to the mills? It was really sad. But if we try to think, why were they there, and what is the condition in which they are preserved or even existing today? At one point of time, all of these mills together constituted 600 acres area of the city. It gave the economic prosperity to Mumbai. What state are we keeping them in? Are we kind of aware of what have they given us in terms of not just money but the grandeur? North America and South America once supplied cotton to America, to Europe. After the American Revolution, all of that stopped. Europe had to depend on Mumbai, had to depend on Bombay because the Britishers were also ruling here. That is the time when Suez Canal opened. That is the time when railway started in Mumbai, 1850s. That is the time when you have all these textile industries formed here. So the history dates back to some time where we can't even actually imagine. We were not even born. And today they are in this state. All the informal settlements are slowly gathering around this area. If you try to see, in fact, chimneys at one point of time were the skyline defining structures of Mumbai. And today, sadly, in fact, being architects, we have to witness this kind of change that is happening in the city where everything looks the same. You have slogans. You have somebody who wants to convert an eastern waterfront into some buildings looking like Manhattan. You very proudly talk about the slogans which say designed in Shanghai, made in Kharghar, but why? Why that homogeneity of architecture? Everywhere, everything looks same. A Singapore, Malaysia, Manhattan, everything just looks the same. Why cannot we have an identity of the city? What we once had. And if you see the monuments which are there in front of you, all of them, the image, the first image happens to be from the VT station. How many of us we just pass by the VT station, in fact, even the layman, without even registering that it is a World Heritage Site? Out of the 36, 38 World Heritage Sites that we have in India, 3 lie in Mumbai. The VT station, the Elephanta case, and the recently nominated Art Deco, the entire Art Deco and the Gothic architecture, Victorian Gothic architecture precinct. So why can't we try to look at, we just walk at the eye level and don't even try to look, forget in detail, but we don't even try to look till the top of the monument to understand what these structures are. Again, moving a little up north, we see Gujarat. Today also Gujarat is a state which is arid, which has scarcity of water. At that point of time, they had to conserve water, store water. So they constructed step wells, which are 4 floors deep, 5 floors deep, and the temperature difference is huge, almost 6 to 8 degrees difference of temperature in the water that is found in the step wells inside. Again, archaeological heritage, Dholavira, which is 3000 BC. So 5000 years from today, you have this kind of architecture which is present in Gujarat, Lothal. Now, most of the times I show this image and I don't show the next part of this. I just show this. People quickly respond saying, what is heritage in this? This is just a room. This may be somebody's living room, just some room with some windows, some doors, some shelves, something. But what if I tell you that the entire ideation of the national struggle movement that happened was started by Mahatma Gandhi and his wife from this monument? Such a huge history. What a huge piece of history. The entire ideation started from here. This is the Sabarmati ashram present on the bank of river Sabarmati in Gujarat. So this is a living heritage. Today it is very much in use. What is the spectacle that Gandhi used? What is the footwear that Gandhi used? In which bowl did Gandhi eat something? All of that is preserved here. That is the kind of importance one tries to highlight when one conserves or gives importance to structures like this. Rajasthan, again moving up north, it is a city where you see huge courtyards which are there, in fact, at different scales. This happens to be from one of the Havelis And then this courtyard again happens to be a large scale courtyard which is present in one of the forts called Amer Fort. Again, a very distinct. In fact, if you try to compare all throughout the kind of we did not see in Goa, but Goa, if you all must have seen the fort carefully, it was not granite which was used in Hampi. It was the local stone used there, which is laterite. Again, in Jaipur or in Rajasthan, people are using the kind of local materials which are available there, and the kind of architecture that you are seeing is distinct in every part of the country. Hence the way the shading devices are used, the closeness, the proximity of the way in which buildings are placed close to each other or not, everything is different. Again, a lot of people know Delhi for the Mughal history that happened, huge history, geometrically so strong, arches were there, domes were introduced, and at a large scale. And why were all of these monuments now? In fact, if you look at the monument which is there in front of you, the entire monument in acres, it is there preserving only certain dead bodies there. So it is a tomb. So it is made in remembrance of something. It is made in remembrance of someone. But just try to look at the grand treatment. Now, some people say this is not Indian. Now, if you try to question the resources used are Indian, the geometry it is very much constructed in India. The labor used is Indian. Only because it is a certain style of construction which belongs to somewhere else, to the part which is outside of India. Why demarcate? It is something which is constructed in India, very much a part of Indian heritage. This is exactly the location, in fact, which is I think also there on the poster. This is the place in Red Fort where our flag hosting also happens. Try to just look at the wall thicknesses. They are not more than 2.5, 3 feet. Again, the thermal insulation, the light quality. Just try to look at the way in which these people are constructing. Again, Agrasen Ki Baudi, if you just cross the National School of Drama in Delhi, this happens to be, so if all of you all have seen the film PK, the house where he stays, this is the Baudi that you have. The Agrasen Ki Baudi, again, it's a 3 to 4 floor uh, depression in the normal ground level, so you have to go down, and again there's a huge temperature difference, but again a different kind of, you have the sandstone and it is constructed like this, very different from the kind of stepwells which are constructed in Gujarat, but sadly they are covered by all the skyscrapers around them. And being architects, I mean, I don't know if you all can identify the difference between two domes. Both are domes, but the left one is the one which is constructed by the Portuguese in Goa, which is the pendentive, and the right hand side is the squinch. So both are domes, but the technique of construction is very different. When you have to make a circular dome sit on 4 walls, when you do it by the triangulation method, you have the pendentives, the triangles. I hope all of you all can see that. That's the pendentive. And when you convert a square into an octagon, that's a squinch on top of it. So it's very easy to make a dome sit on an octagon as opposed to a square. So they devise a strategy to kind of make this work and construct dome in such a way that is very creative. Again, up north you have Himachal Pradesh, and I'm just taking that as an example. So we are not going into all the states. The reason is to show the what is the palette of Indian architecture. So if you try to see Himachal Pradesh, you have a lot of coniferous trees, pine wood trees which are present here. Hence, you have a lot of bat factories, lot of different kinds of architecture where you find wood, timber, which is used as a construction material even today. So if you see why they use this, the joinery between the stone and the wood make all of these structures earthquake resistant, and they ensure that something which happened in Kedarnath, which is because of the illegal concrete construction on the hill, something like that does not happen. Today, people have become ambitious. They have become over aspirational. Everybody wants to go and construct in concrete and glass without understanding what is the history of our land, what is the geography, what is the terrain, what it has to offer. And without the understanding of the land, if we go and impose our architecture on the land, it will give back one day. And it will, whenever you try to interfere with the pace of nature, it always gives back in a way we cannot cope with it. Again, one of the, so if you go to Sikkim and you stay in Gangtok, it happens to be really crowded because it is the capital. But instead of staying in Gangtok, I happen to stay in Pelling, which is really silent and it is good for travelers, not tourists. People who are extremely fond of huge chaotic places and are tourists and want to just see those locations can go and stay in Gangtok, but who want to experience the quiet and the serene landscape of Himachal Pradesh, please go to Pelling and try to see the monastery which is there. The structure that happens to be in front of you would have been a structure which was there for the animal sacrifice over there. But again, the kind of scale, the kind of layered rubbles that are placed here, very different from the architecture that we saw before. So here you have slate, which is used as the primary material for construction. And as I said, that people start looking different. You travel every 10-15 miles, people will start looking different. Their complexions are different. The features that they have is different. So they also, the kind of clothing that they have is different. So we have a lot of practices that people do. They are very diverse in the entire country. When I said that there were a lot of questions in the presentation, one major thing that kept haunting me when I was clicking these pictures is, fine, we are till now talking about British structures, Portuguese structures, Maratha structures, fort, rock cut architecture. Fine, everything is fine, but all of this happened till yesterday. What is it? So while yesterday's history is today's heritage, can today's architecture become tomorrow's heritage? Are we building something which is worthy of preservation today? What are the identity icons that we have today? So that tomorrow, if 1,000 years later, if somebody has to give a presentation on a heritage conservation through heritage photography, what is it that they conserve? Why should they do it? Today, are we sensitive enough to construct something like that? And hence, a culmination of a few structures that I came across, which have the capacity of being called. In fact, I don't know how many of you all know this, but Satprem has constructed this in Auroville, which is again an experimentation lab where a lot of experimentation in architecture happens. This is a Nataraj temple which is constructed on the seashore of Pondicherry. But the scale, the understanding of Indian architecture, and then the manifestation of that in this structure is really phenomenal. Lotus temple, again, religious beliefs give birth to some architectural entities. Architecture is always the last influence that any city, country, state will have. It will always come from some ideology. If there is no Buddhism, there is no rock cut architecture. There is no Islam, forget apart. You will not have the mosque, tomb, nothing. No Christianity, no church. So first comes the idea. Who will preserve the idea of the
Alisha,
Baha'i faith? Yes?
Alisha, hi, sorry to interrupt again, but we're running out of time. So if you
Yes. Yes. Give me 5 minutes and then we can wrap up. Does that work?
yeah.
Okay. Again the Hussain Doshi Gufa. I don't have to talk about this in detail, but an exemplary example of what happens when the MF Hussain meets BV Doshi, which is an architect and a legendary painter. When they meet, and the culmination of their art happens to be this, very worthy of being called a piece of heritage, worthy of conservation for tomorrow. Nari Gandhi, lot of architects do not talk about him, lot of his structures don't even exist. But if you walk up in Lonavala on the Tungarli Hill, the Metro Shoe Bungalow, which is constructed, when it was made, it looked like this. Very creative architect. And when today we say out of the box thinking, he was the one who applied that. He was the one who made House of the Hill. A very strong disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright, who comes here and constructs not more than 30-40 structures. All of them are legendary. Today, if we would have had them, they would have been a really good resource for all the architects and architectural students to kind of learn from. But why do I put this into modern heritage? Recently, some time back, when I happened to visit the structure, it looked like this, with the asbestos sheet, all grass grown all over. What saddened me all the more was that somebody was selling this property was for 36 crores. Now, tomorrow, anybody, whoever purchases this monument, might know the cost and the price of the structure, but not the value of it. Why should it be preserved? Somebody called Nari Gandhi has made this. What is the significance of this? And hence, we say whatever, in fact, while conducting one of the sessions, one student was very kind of low, and I was taking a lecture on heritage conservation, and then the student said that, ma'am, but why should we preserve? Let's have development, let's have huge buildings. Why do we preserve something what older people have made? Let's make place for something new to come in. So just throw it. So she said, ma'am, I will keep it. So I said, why? So she said, because it will remind me of her. So I felt, if one sari which is given by one grandmother to her granddaughter, if you will preserve it, who has the right to pull apart all of these monuments that our nation constitutes of, to pull that down? Things in itself have no value. Memory, by whom they have passed on to us, that is what makes a case for conservation, as opposed to discarding it just because it is old. This happens to be a watch which was gifted to me by grandfather. He passed away 8 years back. Today I preserve this very fondly as a piece of heritage for myself. Sometimes the stopped time reminds me of him, the dust on it reminds me of him, but it has become a piece of heritage for me. I'll just very quickly run through one of the interesting projects that I, along with my sister, we happened to do in the lockdown. We talked about intangible history. We started with a food heritage studio with the basic idea that, okay, we are not able to travel in the lockdown, and neither does the body let you sit quietly, especially when you have traveled a lot before. When we were home, we thought of initiating a project under the food heritage studio that we uh, kind of formed that time. So where we thought a lot of people have their own ways of preparation of food. Maybe the relatives that we have, the friends, everybody has different way of preparation of food. So we thought, let's kind of have a process where we document all of this, and documentation is really poor in the country in general. So what could we do to preserve all of that? So we thought, let's do one thing. If we have to prepare something, so we used to take uh, so from our grandmother, from the relatives, from a lot of people, we gathered a lot of things. We gathered a lot of data on how a certain thing is prepared authentically. So we prepared something, we went ahead and styled it for it to have some kind of aesthetic value. We shot it, the food photography part of it. And the last and the most important, which could have been easily neglected, is we also documented how it is made. So if not for anybody tomorrow, 15 years down the line, 50 years down the line, if tomorrow somebody wants a document on how something was prepared, we're thinking of making the project a little larger, but today we have reached 100 odd documentation of all of the things that we shot, documented, and we have it as a resource with us. And everything cannot be counted with money. So we thought that we should kind of make, so this is a free website which is accessible to all, where everybody can come in and kind of try to have or inculcate the knowledge of heritage that we gathered, and it everybody could kind of take something from it. And again, the last slide, I think, where I said in the beginning that we will come to why do we record heritage through photography. So we cannot say that we have to conserve everything. There has to be some rationale. We cannot, otherwise we'll end up making a museum out of India. But what should we conserve? So there has to be some value. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was born in a house. That fact itself makes that monument very special. It does not need to be more ornamental. Scientific value. I hope everybody knows the Watson Hotel. The first steel construction assembled there on site. Very significant of preserving as a scientific value. Architectural value I will not talk about, and historic value, because the presentation was structured around these two aspects a little more. Social value, everybody knows the kind of mill and chawl structures that India has, and what is the social fabric of the area, why should it be conserved? Rarity value. One Deccan Sultanate king comes and constructs 10 different structures in Aurangabad. Only 3 are remaining today. The rare ones are extremely special, very worthy of preserving. So it makes a case for conservation as opposed to just throwing it away or letting it go into the state of ruins just because it is old. So again, only if you give life to the past, it stays alive and it will start from you. It need not always be a monument. It always need not be something as grand as a Taj Mahal, but it can be something very small. And hence, the Heritage Awareness Project or the Heritage Awareness ideation should start from the school level. So in a way, we don't have much of retrofitting heritage conservation course. KRVIA has it. 3-4 colleges in India have that. But we need to have more such courses which ignite the significance of all of these things in the minds of young people today. What you see in front of you, if we all know the Mahabharat and the Shatranj that was played that made the entire story of Mahabharat, this is a 200-year-old Shatranj, 150, 200-year-old Shatranj that we have in our house. This belonged to my great grandmother's husband. Today we preserve it as an antique piece, and you always see in a room full of modernity, it is always the antique chair that catches the attention. Hence, we can make a case for conservation as opposed to just throwing away things because they have a capacity to become huge heritage. I think I've probably taken over a little more than what the time was. I'm sorry for that, but I would just like to thank KRVIA for giving the opportunity to share my work over here. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Alisha, for that wonderful talk.
Hello.
Yes, you're welcome. I'll just stop sharing. Give me a second.
Thank you so much, Alisha, for your time and the topic that you chose and the way that you presented was very much interesting. Like through your presentation, I found that your presentation was complete a travelogue, like from the time of 2000 BC to the current time. You have experienced the few different things through the different lenses, through different perspective. You have highlighted different vintage characters of different timelines, from the different timelines, and how the ancient practice and their construction techniques, their construction style, or the one fascinating thing that I found, that the details that you worked on, the material palette, like there was this lotus carving and the Buddha's photo. Your imagination, I am really impressed with that. So, and another thing, your complete presentation was more of how intangible cultural elements have been associated to this heritage hotspots, and what impact and the significance and what is their contribution. You spoke very well on that. So yes, thank you very much. Also, I'm currently in the second year masters UC. So my topic currently that I've chosen, my thesis topic is revitalization of abandoned built heritage. So that is how I was connected more with the Rajasthans and the Gujarat parts that you were talking about, the Bauris and the stepwells, what importance it had back then and what right now. So yeah, thank you for all of that. Any questions, anybody? Okay, I just have this one question. When you talk about the different rationals, what are the few rationals that you consider while you think about preserving the heritage, any heritage?
Rationale for? Sorry, I didn't get that. Rationale for preserving heritage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we spoke of that towards the end of the presentation, where it is very important for something to have a certain kind of value. So we did not elaborate a lot on the last headers that we saw, the value evaluation system. So we have a certain thing, for instance, I mentioned that, say a William Shakespeare is born somewhere. People will preserve that as a museum, because the significance is understood. And today, this heritage education should start from houses, what I was staying at towards the end. So people don't really know why do we need to conserve something. And conserving is the last step. Knowing the importance of that monument, it starts from there. Why is it important to us? Why does it exist? And hence, it becomes really important to know the backdrop of the larger system of why are these architecture structures there, why is the intangible heritage that we are speaking of, why is it there in the country. So if we know why they are there, we will automatically have an attitude to kind of preserve. No, we cannot let go of something, because it is very important to us. So yeah, I think if it answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
If any student or faculty has any questions, they can put it in the chat or switch on their mics and speak.
I don't see any questions, Alisha, but if it's very interesting the way that you brought out, this kind of the crucial aspects of kind of investigating what that heritage is actually about. It's like how there's, the play of materials, how it comes together, how different styles get translated in different contexts. And I think it's only when you delve into that kind of depth that you kind of connect with the architecture, with the heritage, and that's how you realize that there is a certain level of importance, and it's crucial to, you know, to learn from it and take it forward. It's not just about repairing a building as such and correcting some, you know, say structural problems with the building. It is much larger than just that idea. So I think through the photographs, a wonderful way of learning that. So that was fantastic. And I'm sure it would have been valuable to the students, especially those who are interested in this area, thesis students, the master students. So yeah, thank you for taking out your valuable time and engaging with this discussion.
Thank you, ma'am.
So Avni, I guess if we don't have any questions, we can stop here.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Thank you, Alisha. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So there's a question by Aishwarya.
Yeah.
Okay.
Want to read it out?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
read
there
that.
is.
Can you elaborate about the vantage points that you choose in your photography project, considering these shape the way you see heritage as well as you intend to present?
I'm reading her question, but if she could elaborate more on what about the vantage points?
Hi, Alisha. This is Aishwarya.
Hi,
It was
hi.
a question. So vantage points in the sense your perspective, where you position your camera, what you intend to capture. So if it's a monument, which angle do you capture it from? Because I mean, interestingly, it was not the front facade, but it's a corner. It may be a corner. Or for example, if it is in the caves, then there is a certain vantage point which is taken in consideration while you're actually capturing these photographs. And I ask this because like when the British were also documenting heritage in a certain way, they chose very carefully their vantage points from where they intended to present a building or a monument, or the idea of monumentality itself. So I mean, I just wanted to kind of understand that point of view, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, so what generally happens is essentially how much ever you want the photograph to talk back to you, it is a two-dimensional medium of expressing. So when you're around in the site, kind of looking at the monument, you understand that in totality. You try to have a 360-degree look of, if you know that there's a temple, you probably might know that there's a market around that, there's some other street which is kind of nearing that. So anything that gives justice, the most justice to the monument that you are seeing with your naked eye. If your camera can also see the way your eyes are seeing, and try to bring out the most from the photograph in terms of sometimes it also depends on what you see depends on where you stand. So in that aspect, your question is really very relevant because consciously, you know, I always whenever I click any photograph, I consciously always thought of what is it that I want to say through this. What is it? Just a picture, just a facade, or just an elevation, or is it something which is, you know, much beyond? So maybe take an example of a cave that we saw. There is something which is very peculiar about the column that you saw, the column capital that we saw. So the Greeks used a certain way of, or the Persian columns were constructed in a certain way. If we want to show that influence or that architectural style here in the Indian context, so what exactly it is that we have to capture? Similarly, probably I would have not gone up the Karla cave staircase. I would have not gotten a Buddha, you know, which the monks had, probably made that time. And not many people know about this. I mean, I've not seen this picture anywhere. I have not, kind of even heard of somebody say about this picture. So sometimes to, go beyond so if you know that if I had also posted a picture of the Humayun's tomb, which is, like the formula picture, and everybody goes to that octagon corner and clicks the photograph from there. So it becomes like the formula picture. But as opposed to that, if you kind of go into details and find out, for instance, you had a picture of the Shikhara or the carving on the top of the Hampi temple. So what is it that you see? What is it that your eye, notices in the structure that is very peculiar, that catches your attention, and you want to also show that, or you want to communicate it through the photograph? So I think you can probably place yourself there and then click. And because you asked this, and I think I did not mention this in the presentation, one conflict which I was always in, at least for the first 3 to 4 years, is where to see from the eyes or the eyes of the camera. So if you try to click, go and immediately click the picture of the place, you end up losing the visual connect, or you end up losing the personal the connect that you can have with the structure. So then what I started following was, then I used to see the entire monument first, and then when your eyes are satisfied looking at it, then take out your camera and kind of click what you found interesting there. Else then you lose up, then when you come back, the only point of reference that you have is the photograph that you click. As opposed to, if you have seen the structure very carefully, your point of reference is your memory. Photograph just happens to be the manifestation of that. So I think if that answered your question.
Yeah, that does. I just also wanted to ask, because it's an interesting medium of, say, preservation, or like preservation of sorts, not conservation entirely, but preservation. What is the medium through which this kind of information can be disseminated, like in order to like reach out to a larger public, and to be able to bring about some sense of, sense of sensitivity towards heritage structures? Where do you see these images being published, or like mediums of dissemination?
Uh, so there are a lot of platforms. Most of the times, we being Indians, we all the time seek validation from, the Europeans or something. Something from outside will say something that, okay, this is great. So then we believe that, yeah, it's great because somebody is saying it. But then lot of I try to sow the seed of heritage conservation in every child, and that is what I did not mention in the presentation, is because I'm working with how youth can get affected. The way and the intensity in which I gave a presentation on heritage conservation here, because many of us are about to become conservation architects, some of us already are. So we talk in a certain language which we can understand. But hence, then I also do then the education the awareness program, where if you can inculcate the significance of heritage in the school children, in the children who probably are the growing generation for tomorrow, because the youth of today is going to be the acting generation of tomorrow. So, and that is why I also said that more than the exhibition of, see, tomorrow I can just be flattered in the room saying that, oh, these photographs are so great and I cannot do anything about it. Probably at the most I can take a frame and put my fill my entire house and make that a museum or my travel log. But more than, see, of course, it was the recent Venice Biennale that happened. The entire document, this photography heritage portfolio that I have, it was displayed in the Venice Biennale recently. So I'm sure people there would have also seen what is the diverse range of architectural and food heritage, the cultural heritage that I spoke towards the end. So they could have witnessed what is India all about. So the Thames Festival that happens in, around this time. So I sent in, for an entry over there. So, if I could speak about what your country has. So as opposed to just the Taj Mahal, which people know, or the Gujarat tourism advertise. So barring that, if you actually, if you go like a tourist, you will just see what you are supposed to see and come back. But if you go like a traveler, you will go explore a lot of different places, which might not be heritage for somebody else. But for you, some other technique of construction, some other detailing that somebody does might tell you a lot about your country. So the attempt is more of that, of the latter, of what I said. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Alisha, for that answer. We will be closing the talk now. Thank you for joining and delivering this. And thank you.